So I'm Alex, the CEO of Futurevia Foundation, and thank you so much for joining us, Congressman Pittenger, and I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Glad to. Robert Pittenger, former member of Congress from Charlotte, North Carolina.
It's truly an honor to have you here. So I guess the first question for you would be, could you start by telling us about the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum? How did you come up with the idea? What inspired you to start this?
Yes, certainly it will, Alex, and thank you for the opportunity and privilege to be with you today. I commend you for your great work. The forum, the concept began in 2013 when there was tremendous reaction to the Snowden revelations. And there are a lot of angst and frankly anger among many people, particularly the European community, as they were under the assumption that we were listening to phone calls uh, without, I'm turning my sound off, I'm sorry. Um, we were listening to their phone calls indiscriminately, and we're not aware of the oversights we have for privacy and civil liberties. So as the months went by, there was nothing being done by the current administration to address the problem. And I was, which impacted trade and NATO and everything. It was a great problem with trust. Just a real, from the perception part of Europeans, it was a real breach of trust. So I was having uh, lunch with a member of the Austrian Parliament, who was a good friend, and he brought up to me, he said, we love America, we follow America, we trust you, but what is this NSA all about? And of course, that was the problem related to the Europeans. And I said, well, why don't you come over, bring some of your colleagues, we'll have a little briefing. So he brought 5 colleagues, the Green Party, the Socialists, the Christian Democrats, and others. And we spent 4 or 5 hours with them. Members of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, Foreign Affairs Committees, and others. And after the end of the discussion, of course, they came in very mad, very angry, but they went out and they got it. They understood our oversights from the executive branch, from the Congress, and from the judicial branch. But I went back to their committee chair of intelligence, Mike Rogers. I said, Chairman, this seemed to work. Why don't you invite all the Europeans over? Let's have one big meeting to address this problem. It's a real concern to them. And so he said, well, no, why don't you have the meeting and we'll all come. So I invited the speakers of the many parliaments in Europe, and they either came or they sent delegations. We had 125 MPs from 24 countries. We spent a day and a half with them. And of course, they came in very mad, very angry. But at the end of the day and a half, they were fine. They said, but we want to meet in Europe. I said, fine. So we met in Austria, about the same crowd. Went over the same things. We had a different committee chair of Intel then. But bipartisan, went over there for this meeting. The White House people came with us. But the next day, after the meeting in Vienna, we went to Berlin. I went to meet with the Germans by themselves. And at this meeting, the chairman of the committee made the point to us after an hour of dialogue, in which they were expressing their venting, their anger. He said, I must tell you, we have only 4 members of our intelligence committee. We meet one time a month for 4 hours, and we really have no clue what our own government is doing. So the lights go on. And we realize we have a real dearth of knowledge with our friends and colleagues in parliaments on this issue, but not just information, intelligence sharing, but a broad range of topics. We realized we need to build a better working knowledge and stronger collaboration with our friends and partners around the globe, whether it's illicit finance or cybersecurity, our supply chains, 5G, AI, quantum computing, minerals, energy. All these issues are so relevant and so important for legislators. So to that end, we, over the last decade, have hosted 10 forums around the globe. We've hosted 27 forums, 10 of which have been in Washington, and the rest of them in other capitals. When we go into a country, the speaker or the leader of that legislature, that parliament, must host the meeting or we won't come. They write the letter of invitation. We send it out to our list of global parliamentarians. And we essentially have 150 to 280 or so parliamentarians who attend from 50 to 60 countries at each forum.
That's amazing. And you mentioned cybersecurity, and it's emerging as a larger issues in the coming like days and months with like all the different like cyber attacks and stuff like that. So like how does the forum address the emerging threats in cybersecurity space?
Yeah, I think what is very important for them is the acumen, the knowledge base that comes from the business community. We have many corporate heads and leadership who brief these parliamentarians. We generally have 40 to 50 experts at any given forum doing these briefings. We have panels on every topic. And certainly in cybersecurity, they learn how to deter and prevent these attacks. And what we learn from industry, we incorporate into our governments. The knowledge base really has come from the business community.
And what were the greatest challenges in running the forum, and what have you learned from them?
Well, the challenges are simply the logistics of bringing everyone together. We have been to date in Germany, France, Austria, Latvia, Hungary, Romania, UK, Kenya, Argentina, Brazil, Panama, Paraguay, Guatemala, and some of those countries several times. And then, of course, we've been in DC 10 times. So there's a lot of logistics that go into hosting any given meeting. In February, we'll be in Manila, hosted by Speaker Ramoldes. And in May, we'll be in Madrid, hosted by the President of the Senate. In August, we'll be in Austria, in Salzburg. Frankly, it's going to be at the Sound of Music House, if you're familiar with that. They're in Salzburg, hosted by the leadership of their parliament. And then in October, we'll be in Warsaw. So we've got a full plate. I'm trying to work in Botswana somewhere. The ambassador really wants us to come down there. So that's the agenda, and there's bringing together the experts from not just the U.S. but different parts of the world. They'll come into any given forum. So right now we've got about 20 experts who are coming already committed to go to Manila, and we'll have experts. They're coming in. They're flying from the States and from Europe, and we'll have those from the region and from the Philippines as well who will be a part of it.
Well, that's amazing. And in the forum, you highlighted the importance of like international collaboration. And the space where it's really important is the conflict in Ukraine. So like how like do you see like the forming contributed to the Ukraine conflict and
We've had a dozen or so uh, members of parliament from the Ukraine parliament who attended our forum. And frankly, one of them wrote a letter not too long ago stating that he learned at the forum what they could do legislatively to prevent illicit finance flows coming through the country and helping to capitalize the Russians. So we want each of our fora to have specific capabilities and an understanding of what they can do as legislators to go back to their own country.
yeah, and like what's your perspective on the ongoing invasion in Ukraine? How has it reshaped global security dynamics?
Well, obviously, we recognize it as an enormous invasion of liberty and freedom upon the Ukraine, but also an ongoing threat to Europe. That's why, frankly, we're organizing a forum in Warsaw this fall, and Putin is unrelenting. He will not stop, and so we want to be there to show support, but more importantly, to give tools for how they can help organize and help uh, mitigate the threat that prevails throughout the region.
Yeah, and how would you assess the U.S. policy towards Ukraine?
Well, I think the U.S. policy, we've been enormously generous. We've been incredibly uh, there. We have been there for Europe since World War II. And we've shed our blood throughout the continent, and we've certainly given financially to the support of the entire continent. So I think uh, what is needed is a better insight in how to restrict the massive financial capabilities of the Russians and how to restrict those countries who are enabling them. Uh, India, since the beginning of the war, has taken on, acquired a substantial amount of LNG from Russia. Of course, Russia gets great support from China and now North Korea. So we need to think effectively, strategically, how to align our partners so that they are not supporting those countries that support Ukraine.
Yeah, and Ukraine's relationship with NATO has been a critical issue. So what's your thoughts on Ukraine joining NATO?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that they didn't. I think it's unfortunate in the past. I think it's unfortunate that they frankly gave up through the Clinton years of their nuclear capabilities. But that's another story. We have to deal with life as it is today. So I think the support of the union will be important for them long term. I think we've got to get out of this mess today, and there's nobody who thinks better, more clearly, more constructively, and strategically than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not. People can misread Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a man who cares not just about America, but about the world. But he knows we need a strong America, but he knows that there are more effective things we could do to prevent our allies from being our enemies from being strengthened, our adversaries. And sometimes our allies are contributing to the process of supporting our adversaries. And we need to think through how to stop that. We had Iran on its face, and yet through misguided direction, they were again given a life support to come back and then become another major threat around the globe. There's much more we can do to put economic pressure on Russia as well as China. And I think Donald Trump knows how to do that. The world needs to wake up and see that they can't be in the pocket with those who are our enemies. And as long as they stay in bed with our enemies, then they're supporting our enemies. It's likened to the 1930s. If you were supporting economically with your trade and agreements, Germany, which enabled Hitler to do what he attempted to do in the 1940s. You don't support your adversaries at a time that they are creating havoc around the world and threatening freedom and liberty throughout the world.
And Trump said that he'll end this war in 24 hours. How do you
I
see that
think
happening?
if anybody, that may be euphemistic, I said it, but I think he knows what can be done to put pressure on countries that are supporting Russia. And he knows how to put pressure on Russia so that Russia will be forced to come to the table. Much as though, but in the same like manner, he put pressure on Iran and put economic pressure. So it's better geopolitical thinking and strategic thinking and forcing our partners to be aligned with principle and not just self-serving interest.
Yeah, and about Ukraine's nuclear capabilities you mentioned. So if Ukraine hadn't given up its nuclear weapons, how would the conflict turn?
Well, I think they, I understand Ukraine. They didn't, and we didn't want nuclear weapons spread around the globe, and there was good reason, understanding for that. But they acted in good faith, and I respect that. and perhaps they were not returned the same favor. So they're feeling the brunt of that effect now. If you have those capabilities, it's a deterrent. Now it's also an encouragement for other people to do likewise. So there's two sides of the same coin. But they did give up their deterrence by giving up nuclear capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And like beyond military aid, what should US focus on when it comes to like economic support and rebuilding efforts in Ukraine?
Well, we ought to force the Russians. They created the havoc. Trump, better than anyone, knows how to address our adversaries. He's a strong man, and he's not intimidated, and he's not weak. And he'll force Putin to the table, or else Putin and his entire regime will be threatened. And I trust Donald Trump with the insight and the knowledge base and the people he gathers around him to know how to put the kind of pressure and accountability on Russia that he'll put on them.
Yeah, and like estimates are about like that it will take over $1 trillion and it might take even more to rebuild the Ukraine's economy. And so do you think Russians should pay for that? Because there were about like 400 billion in confiscated Russian assets.
Absolutely. That'll be first at the table. We ought to force it to.
And like another question is how can US help strengthen Ukraine's like democratic institutions with like
Well, I think markets, we need an accountable government that is market driven, and the oligarchs, you know, aren't there to continue on and to persevere in power. You know, power is a wonderful thing because it enables you to accomplish a lot, but power can also be abused. And I think internally, there has to be greater accountability for people in office, the same way we have in our own country. And no government is pure because we're all fallen people. And we're never going to, if we expect purity, then we're making a grave mistake. Jimmy Carter wanted purity in Iran. And because the Shah, he felt was, you know, had human rights issues. So we deposed the Shah, and for that we get Khomeini. So I think we've got to be thoughtful and careful and work with our friends to help build those institutions. But we can't ever expect there to be a pure system.
and speaking on like power abuse, so Zelensky came in as this populist with a message to save Ukraine from corruption and to clean up the Ukrainian government and stuff. And now people start to criticize Zelensky because his like official term basically ended, but because they have a military regime in the country, he still remains a legitimate president. So how do
Well,
you see that?
that's I'm not going to fault him for that. He's in the middle of a war. You know, he's trying to win a war, and he has the attention of the world. He has the respect of the world. He's garnered enormous support globally. So I think it'd be a huge mistake for him to lead the stage at this time for Ukraine.
Absolutely. And in your view, how does the impact of the Ukraine war will reshape global geopolitics?
Well, obviously, we're all realize that if you let an adversary run leash and not control, that they're going to continue. So I think we've got to stop them. And as we all know, if Putin succeeds, and it sends a signal to the other bad actors.
And do you think that if Ukraine loses, that China will um, start its like ambitions over Taiwan and stuff?
China is going to be a threat regardless. It has. certainly Ukraine, it's a demonstration of how much we'll stand up. But the Indo-Pacific is a total different statement. It's a total different policy, and it stands on its own feet and it has its own issues. Frankly, that's why we're going to Manila. The Philippines are a great partner for us, and they understand the challenges in the South China Sea relative to trade and the massive trade that goes through there. And we, so what happens in that region by if there is an occurrence by China, it affects global markets, global trade. It affects every country. So I think regardless of what happens in Ukraine, there will be a massive counter to Xi Jinping and his focus on attacking Taiwan or whatever ventures he has.
And are you worried about like North Korea supporting Russia and about like Russia's continuous nuclear threats?
Yeah, North Korea is always going to be a pest. And I don't say that lightly as a pest, but they can be wiped out in a matter of minutes. And, he has, Teddy Roosevelt used to say, speak softly and carry a big stick. Well, the Koreans speak loudly and carry a relatively small stick compared to the nuclear capabilities of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking about these authoritarian states, like and imperialistic states who have this like imperial history and really very little democratic background, like China, Russia, like Iran, do you see them in the future becoming liberal democracies?
No, I think that's wishful thinking. I mean, I commend President Bush. I love him to pieces. He wanted to democratize the world. I think it's unrealistic. I think those countries have never emerged out of they've never known a democratic state, and I think we can hope for that. We can try to incentivize that every way we can, but to create that as a realistic outcome, I don't think we're dealing in facts on the ground as though they are. I think you have to deal with it, play the hand you've got, and the hand we have, are not democratic states.
Yeah, and also returning to the Ukraine conflict, so Russia has taken well, a significant portion of the Ukrainian territory with the annexation of Crimea and invasion of the Donbass. So, like, what if Russia never gives up that territory? How do you see peace talks uh, about like
Well,
ending the war?
there's obvious concerns on an ongoing war and the loss of life, the more destruction. Um, when is enough enough? Uh, any peace agreement doesn't please everybody. But again, are you better off by continuing a war where more people die, where there's more destruction, where there's more uh, institutionally is harmed? It's not an easy decision. It's not a black or white. These are tough decisions that have to be made. But I think we all see what's happened to date. And sometimes, you say, let's cut bait. When's the time to walk away? Because you've got to assume the Russians are never going to give up. And unless we're extraordinarily effective in stopping the Chinese and the North Koreans and Iranians and whoever, even the Indians buying LNG from Russia and other countries, unless we're able to strong arm these countries to stop supporting Russia. Of course, we were buying, oil and gas from Russia ourselves. It was nonsense.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And Russians really have this imperialistic view that Ukraine is part of Russia, and they always had that view. So they don't really see Ukraine as an independent country. And like with that, like what if by some magical forces, Navalny would have been elected as president of Russia? How do you see Russian foreign policy be different?
Well, it would be. I mean, it'd be total different approach. And you wouldn't have a strong guy at the top brutally bringing havoc throughout the region.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're coming to the end here, finally, like, what's your message with Americans supporting Ukraine, and what's your message to Ukrainians?
They're wonderful people. I love the Ukrainian people. I've gotten to know many of them very closely. I admire the courage, I admire the dedication, the fortitude, the stamina. It's hell of what the country has been through, just pure hell. So my heart and prayers go with the people of Ukraine. And I think, when they're dealing with somebody like Putin, you've done everything you can do, and you fight on, and you bring in all the support you can. And then you find a way um, to try to bring it to an end. You've got to bring it to an end someday. You just can't. This war just can't keep going on and destroying more lives and killing more people. And you've got to have a future. And it's going to be very difficult to rebuild at this point. But I hate to see if it goes on another year, how more difficult, or 2 years, how difficult that's going to be. So it's not there's evil in the world. And President Trump is facing, I think, the most explosive time potentially, geopolitically, with greater threats and graver threats than we've ever had. So there's a lot on the table, and Ukraine is one important area, but we've also got enormous challenges from terrorists, from China, from North Korea, from Iran, and there's a lot on the plate for America to try to be a good partner and try to maintain global security.